Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. As the season is rapidly approaching, still seems to be a lot of dominoes that could potentially fall, whether they happen before the season or during the season. And typically in the NBA, those dominoes are disgruntled star players. And we've talked a lot on this show already about Ben Simmons. We've talked a little bit about Karl-Anthony Towns. I know we've talked a lot in the past about Bradley Beal. Those seem to be the big names that come up in terms of conversation. And Sap, you had an interesting poll question this week on your Twitter account at JohnSap25. Which of those three guys would fit best on the Celtics? Because, we are based in Boston, so we do tend to ask Celtics-centric questions. I know the results of the poll were overwhelming, but I don't know that you necessarily agree with the results of your own poll.
No, the results were overwhelming. 68% said Karl-Anthony Towns, 18% said Bradley Beal, and 14% said Ben Simmons. And I expected Simmons to finish third because he seems to be the most unhappy of those three players. Bradley Beal's probably going to get moved by Washington at some point during the season, but he really isn't putting up much of a protest right now. He's at training camp. He was at media day talking stupidly about, whether you should be vaccinated or not. That's beside the point. Karl-Anthony Towns is very unhappy with what's going on in Minnesota. They had fired the general manager, brought a new one in. Now they've got new ownership, of course, led by Alex Rodriguez, which, again, this is not coming from the Onion. Alex Rodriguez is an owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves. So those two guys, I think, could get moved, but it's not urgent. With Philadelphia, it's urgent with Ben Simmons. He's not going to report to training camp. He's now put out there that he does not want to play with Joel Embiid, not necessarily because of a personality conflict, but because he doesn't think they work well together and that he wants to be the guy. The only issue I have with that in terms of Ben Simmons is you can't be the guy if you don't shoot. You can't go 2 of 4 from the floor, 1 of 2 from the free throw line in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference semifinals and be the guy. You, at that point, are a complementary player and a really good complementary player, a guy who can pass, rebound, and defend. And that duo should work in Philadelphia. And you know what, Jet? It did last year. Let's not forget, they were the number 1 seed, not Milwaukee, not Brooklyn. It was Philadelphia that was the number 1 seed. I thought they were going to go to the finals, and they tripped up against the Atlanta Hawks in the second round. So that could work, but it's, I think, beyond gone at this point. Doc Rivers can't appear to repair this. And again, I think sometimes we overrate Doc being the guy who can get all these different sides together to work out. It didn't work in LA with the Clippers, did it? With Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. And I don't think it ended that great with the Celtics. And we know it was a disaster in Orlando early in his career. So maybe we've overrated Doc Rivers' ability to put warring sides together and be the peacemaker. But at some point, Ben Simmons is going to have to get moved by Philadelphia. Personally, I would want to see Ben Simmons because I think he would have the highest ceiling with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Now, the key to the poll question is all things being equal, right? So let's kind of take out of the equation that Jaylen Brown has to move. Can you get one of these players without giving up Jaylen Brown? Probably not. The most likely guy you could get back without giving up Jaylen Brown would be Ben Simmons, right? Because his trade value continues to plummet. You're not getting Karl-Anthony Towns without giving up Jaylen Brown unless the Minnesota Timberwolves are insane, which, they may be with having an owner like Alex Rodriguez. So, maybe you find stupid ownership in Minnesota, Washington, and Philadelphia, and you make the right move. I don't think Philadelphia's ownership is stupid. And, of course, they've got Daryl Morey running things. I don't think he's going to give away Ben Simmons, certainly not to the Boston Celtics. So the poll was basically about if all things were equal, who would fit best with Brown and Tatum. I think Ben Simmons would be the perfect fit. He's a defensive player. He can rebound. He's a facilitator. Those two guys can score. I think that would be an interesting threesome, Tatum, Brown, and Ben Simmons.
Yeah, I voted for Karl-Anthony Towns in the poll because I think that's, the two positions the Celtics are really lacking is a big and a point guard. And so, Ben Simmons is a point guard, Karl-Anthony Towns is a big. I just really like, Towns' skill set as a complementary skill set with Tatum and Brown being able to play down low. And also he can step out and hit threes at a very high percentage for a big. And the fact that he wouldn't be asked to have to be that the guy who does everything for a team like he's been asked to do for most of his career, if not all of his career in Minnesota. I think he could flourish even more. He's just a few years removed from being considered by most GMs to be the guy they would start their franchise
Mhm.
with. So I do feel like, he's a very valuable player who in the right situation could elevate a team that already has, players like the Celtics do to championship contenders. So, and I think his age lines up perfectly with Tatum and Brown as well. So all things being equal, that's who I voted for as number one. But I did say this on your poll. I commented, I do think Ben Simmons would be my second choice, and then Bradley Beal. I like Bradley
Mhm.
Beal a lot as a player. I'm liking him a lot less as a person after like you said, the shenanigans he pulled during his press conference, just talking nonsense about the COVID vaccine. But I don't know or believe that that's the best fit for the team. I think it gets pretty redundant with Brown,
Mhm.
Tatum, and Beal. I don't think Beal offers much on the defensive side of things. And it's not like Karl Anthony Towns has been a defensive monster, but he can block shots. And I think again, he's had so much responsibility in Minnesota throughout his career that I do think that he would become more valuable defensively if you ask a little bit less of him offensively. And as far as Ben Simmons goes, Sap, I do value Ben Simmons obviously a lot as a defender. I think he's one of, if not the best perimeter defender in the NBA. And I think he's one of the best distributing point guards, even though, he's nearly 7 feet tall in the NBA. That being said, it's hard to look at what's going on in Philadelphia right now, and as every day goes by, not look at Ben Simmons and go, do I really want this guy on my team?
Mhm.
And that's sort of the part that I'm struggling with right now, with all things being equal, like you said, who you would add. I don't think Philadelphia would trade him to the Celtics in the first place. And I don't think, and the Celtics certainly wouldn't offer Jaylen Brown for him because Jaylen Brown's value is frankly higher than Ben Simmons right now. So, the latest report, Sap, is that, like you said, he doesn't want to play with Embiid anymore, and he's willing to sit out the entire season and and not get paid and lose a year of towards free agency. I just don't know what his priorities are, and I know we've talked a lot about this before, Sap. It just seems like every day his value seems to plummet more and more.
And I question if he loves basketball, right? We saw James Harden do this a year ago, but we never questioned that James Harden loves basketball. James Harden is a baller. Kevin Durant's a baller. Kyrie Irving, I think, in his heart and soul, is a baller, but he's such a contrarian and a troll that sometimes that gets in the way of it. With Ben Simmons, I don't know if he loves basketball, so that's obviously an issue. Of the three players, the one I'd be most concerned with, believe it or not, is Bradley Beal because of his friendship with Jason Tatum. And I would be really horrified if you have Jason Tatum, Bradley Beal, and Jaylen Brown. And I know out of media day, it's all kumbaya. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are buddies and they play well together and all that stuff. But what could happen there is you would have a clique formed with Jason Tatum and Bradley Beal, and you think that Jason Tatum is your best player, so you're going to try to do everything to keep him here. And then Jaylen Brown might be the guy who, even though he's here, might be the odd man out. And they don't have the leadership to kind of make that work, right? Like you need an ultimate leader, whether it's LeBron now or whoever in the past, maybe Michael Jordan, pick anybody, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, who could be, first of all, better than any of those guys, but also have the leadership ability to put them in their place. I would just worry like hell that Jason Tatum and Bradley Beal would form a clique and leave Jaylen Brown out, and you would have all sorts of chemistry issues on that team. That's why I put him last of the three. I like Simmons in terms of his game, but obviously you have to question his commitment to basketball. I don't know. I mean, it's the same thing with Kyrie Irving, like we talked about on an earlier podcast, Jet. With Kyrie Irving and Ben Simmons, they're marvelously talented players. Like they're both in their prime. They should have a lot of basketball left, but they're not reliable, whether it be Kyrie with his injuries or his attitude, and Ben Simmons just maybe not loving basketball. Like, do you trade the farm for those guys? That's a big move for an executive to make.
Yeah, now, I think that's an interesting point, Sap, with saying, how a click potentially could form if the Celtics were to acquire Beal without giving up Brown. I think we've seen, even in recent history, but certainly throughout the NBA, that being the third guy on a big
Hmm.
three is difficult.
It is.
I think it worked for the Celtics for, the year they won the championship. Let's say, I don't think that the reason they didn't win more championships was because the chemistry didn't
No.
work. It was because of injuries, but it worked the first year because I think Kevin Garnett was the exact leader you need to make it work.
Hmm.
And Ray Allen had the right personality to be comfortable being that third guy. Right. So you need to,
They
it's a
were
two,
also older, Jet, right? They were
you're right. That's a good
long in
point,
their
Seth.
career, and they were already Hall of Famers. Like if those guys never played another game, Garnett was going to the Hall of Fame, Allen was going to the Hall of Fame, Pierce, because he'd been to like 6 All-Star games, was at some point going to be a Hall of Famer. They were all Hall of Famers. They had already established themselves as great players who just wanted to win a championship. So when you're 31 or 32, you look at things differently than when you're 24, 25. When you're 24, you're
Definitely.
25, you have that bravado that you're going to be the guy, right? I'm the guy. You're going to carry this franchise. When you're older, you realize you can't necessarily do that easily. So you come along and you form, a fantastic threesome that won a championship. So yeah, completely different than if you had, say, Bradley Beal, Jason Tatum, and Jaylen Brown. Brown and Tatum are a year apart in age. Bradley Beal's a little bit older. What the hell's Bradley Beal ever won? That's the other
Right.
thing. He's
No,
not coming here with anything. At least when Garnett came here, he had won an MVP and got to the Western Conference Finals. Allen had been to the Eastern Conference Finals. That's a hell of a lot more than Bradley Beal's accomplished.
right. And I think, it's difficult again, especially as that third banana on a big
Mm-hmm.
three to take a huge step back in terms of what your role is going to be. Now, obviously, Pierce and Allen, their games weren't, totally similar, but you could have looked at it and said, okay, well, this is somewhat redundant. These are both really good shooters. They're alpha, primary scorers. But, Ray Allen was comfortable being the guy who ran off of screens and shot threes. But if you look at what happened in Cleveland and Miami with their big threes, and they did win because LeBron is an excellent leader and made it work. But it was an adjustment period for Chris Bosh and Kevin Love because
Mm-hmm.
essentially what happened was they went from being primary scorers to being spot up shooters,
Right.
which is a very very different way to go and a very different your stats look completely different. You're touching the ball a lot less. And I think, without the right personalities involved, you can really get you could start to get upset and you could really disrupt chemistry. So I think that that's, something that certainly with the younger guys too could play a factor in terms of who the Celtics look to bring in if they do look to bring in a third star, which I think all Celtics fans are hoping. I think that's a great point that you raised, Sap, again with that click. We already know how close Tatum and Bradley Beal are, and now you told me you listening to a Jason Tatum press conference, and it appears that he is vaccinated, unlike his friend Bradley Beal and his friend Kyrie Irving. So that's a sigh of relief for myself, but. We do know that Tatum is still very close with Bradley Beal, and they played on Team USA until Beal had to sit out because he had COVID, and they're childhood friends, same high school, so it certainly has the potential to be that way too. Sep, I just again with that sort of red flag there, and the fact that Beal doesn't offer much defense, and as you mentioned, pretty astutely hasn't really won anything. Ben Simmons with this who the hell knows standoff that's going on right now. It almost is like to me, Karl Anthony Towns wins by default. I know he
By
hasn't won
default.
anything. I know he hasn't won anything either, but at least he seems to have his head on his shoulders. You can say it's, similar to Bradley Beal. It's not like Minnesota's done a really good job trying to put
Mm-hmm.
a competitive team around Karl Anthony Towns. And for the most part of Karl Anthony Towns' career, the West has been incredibly difficult. So you can look at it and say, okay, well, they have one guy. It's not necessarily easy to make the playoffs. So I think he's the logical choice there. I mean, and I think you can sort of debate between Simmons and Beal. If Simmons' head was screwed on straight and seemed like he cared about basketball, I think you could make a very strong case for him, but it's clearly not.
Yeah, he has the highest ceiling of those guys because he has a unique skill set. He's such a great defender, passer, rebounder. Look, I've compared him to Scottie Pippen. He could be a bigger version of Scottie Pippen because those were the attributes that Scottie Pippen had. But Scottie Pippen could also score 20 points per game. He wasn't afraid of the free throw line. He became a solid outside and mid-range shooter. Ben Simmons hasn't done that. The rest of his game is very comparable to Scottie Pippen. The defense, the playmaking ability, rebounding, just a versatile player. But he hasn't been able to really fulfill his promise because his offense is still short of the rest of his game. what has to happen with these threesomes, Jet, is you have to have a natural leader. Let's even look to football, right? Let's go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Tom Brady. Antonio Brown, wherever he's played, has been the number one guy, right? And he's been a pain in the ass wherever he's been, whether it was Pittsburgh or even for a very short period of time with the Raiders. But with Tom
Didn't
Brady
like the helmets there.
Didn't like the helmets.
In Oakland. Yeah.
He came here for a week and looked like he was going to get along great with the Patriots, and then he decided to attack the owner on Twitter, and it was see you later, Antonio Brown. But since he's been in Tampa Bay, he's clearly the third or fourth option for Tom Brady, right? I mean, you would think that Mike Evans or Godwin or Gronk are above him in the pecking order.
Yeah.
He's happy because he's got a leader in Tom Brady who in the huddle can say, Antonio, I can't come to you right now, or just get open, whatever the case is, whatever these guys talk about. Now, you get my point, though. And that's why it can work with LeBron James, because he can pull aside Chris Bosh, Kevin Love, and say, I know you guys were the number one guys where you were before. Now you're the number three guy, but we're going to win championships, and that's important. That's not going to happen in Boston because Ben Simmons is going to think he's the guy and Jason Tatum thinks he's the guy. And we sure as hell know that Jaylen Brown's opinion of himself is very high. That would be difficult. And look, Al Horford doesn't have the cachet to be the leader. You know, he's the fifth or sixth best player, and Marcus Smart doesn't have the skill set to be the leader because next thing you know, you may have fist fights in the locker room. So that's going to be the difficult part of all of this. Now, one thing I want to throw out there, Jet, is what about the possibility of Ben Simmons going to Minnesota? Because that's been rumored as well.
Sure.
What would Minnesota give to the 76ers? Probably wouldn't be Karl-Anthony Towns, because the idea would be pitting together Karl-Anthony Towns, pairing together Karl-Anthony Towns with Ben Simmons.
He also hates Joel Embiid, so that wouldn't work.
Yeah, that wouldn't work. Yeah. Isn't this great? This is what makes the NBA great. It's like, Real Housewives of the NBA, because two of the best players despise each other, so they can't play with each other. That's awesome. I love it.
No, I mean, the logical
thing.
I
love it. That's what makes the sport so fascinating.
The 76ers, their backs are obviously against the wall because they want to compete now, and Ben Simmons has outright said he won't play for them anymore. But, Ben Simmons is so badly damaged his trade value that, what do you get back in return? There's no way in hell the Timberwolves would trade Karl-Anthony Towns. There's no way in hell they'd trade Anthony Edwards. And from what you're hearing, they're reluctant to trade D'Angelo Russell. Now, on a prior podcast, we talked about how D'Angelo Russell was saying very positive things about Kyrie Irving after his anti-vax stance. And Karl-Anthony Towns, we know, has been very affected by COVID. So maybe Karl-Anthony Towns says, hey, soften up on that D'Angelo Russell thing. Maybe, it's fine to move him. So I guess that's the logical move, is D'Angelo Russell for Ben Simmons. It would seem on paper like the Sixers would be taking a bath in that trade. But I do think that it perhaps, because D'Angelo Russell, say what you want about him, I think he's a dummy, and he's maybe a little bit overrated, but he's not scared to shoot the ball. So maybe
not at all. No.
It ends up working out, well in Philadelphia, if that's, the big piece they get in return, and they're able to be, somewhat competitive. Obviously, Minnesota would have to send some picks too, which could potentially be valuable. But okay, let's hypothetically look at a Ben Simmons, Anthony Edwards, Karl-Anthony Towns pairing. I still don't think Ben Simmons is the guy on that team. I think Anthony Edwards has become the guy on that team. He's got the personality. He seems to embrace being in Minnesota. He is a guy who's certainly not scared of the moment. I mean, he's trying to jam on everybody he can, and successfully did so a lot of times last season. So again, I don't. Ben Simmons can say he wants to be the man, and that's what his representation at Clutch Sports is saying, but he has not shown for one instance in his career that he's either capable of that or truly wants to be that. I don't think that your best player can be somebody who is unwilling to even go to the free throw line or, attempt jump shots. I don't think he can be the best player on a good team.
We generally equate being the man with being a great scorer, right? LeBron, let's leave him out of the equation. Great scorer.
Yeah,
great
I don't know what else you would equate
Let's
it with.
put him upside. But that's what it is. Normally, as great as Scottie Pippen was, he was only the man when Jordan retired. And look, he finished, I think, third in the league in MVP voting the year Jordan was out for the entire year, and the Bulls won only 2 fewer games after Jordan left. So he was phenomenal. But he also was more advanced in his career and won 3 championships. So at that point, Scottie Pippen, you could make a case, was the best player in the league. He finished
right.
third in MVP voting. Ben Simmons doesn't have
you
that
can be
within
great
him.
at defense, and that can be, but I mean, like Kevin Garnett is better defensive player than offensive player, but he still scored a hell of a lot and was
his MVP year, he averaged 24 a game. When he came here, he averaged 16 or 17. He didn't need to score. He had Ray Allen, Paul Pierce. He had guys that could score.
Right.
So yeah, you could be a great defensive player. Look, Giannis is a great defensive player who, by the way, scores 27 a game, gets you 11, 12 rebounds and 6 assists. I mean, because he busts his ass
right
in his sleep. That's his average game. With Ben Simmons, I want to be the man, but I took 4 shots in game 7 and I went to the line twice and hit 1. And I turned down a dunk to pass to my teammate who got fouled and hit 1 of 2. And then my best player said that was the turning point in the game. And the coach isn't sure if I can be the point guard. I mean, it is a goddamn mess in Philadelphia. And we saw Doc last week go on the media tour and say, well, I really didn't say that. Well, okay, Doc, we heard you say it. Like, we have this thing called the internet now, which, you can't refute. So, what could happen there in Minnesota is maybe you have part 2 of Wiggins, Towns, and Jimmy Butler, and it just wouldn't work. I mean, they did get to the playoffs, but it should have been better. I get the feeling that Anthony Edwards is kind of like a Jimmy Butler, like he's a personality and he's not afraid to speak up and, take big shots. Karl Anthony Towns is still there. And Ben Simmons is kind of like an Andrew Wiggins, right? In the sense that he's kind of this meek personality I don't even know what Ben Simmons sounds like or Andrew Wiggins sounds like because they're just not very verbal. So that's, you know what I'm saying? It's almost like Kawhi. Like, what does Kawhi exactly sound like? I mean, he's a robot. We know what, like Russell Westbrook has the hoarse voice and Kyrie has just throws out all sorts of words that I don't even think he knows what they mean. And we know what Durant sounds like. He sounds pissed off, but I honestly don't know with someone like Karl Anthony Towns. Well, Karl Anthony Towns a little bit more, but Ben Simmons, he's Australian. So I would assume he has an Australian accent. I don't know what the guy sounds like. He's not a personality enough to be the guy. That kind of goes hand in hand. You can't be this quiet introvert and be the guy. It just doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. And so I kind of question the sincerity of that, request to be the, go to a team where he's the guy, because he hasn't shown that he even wants to be, let alone has the ability to be, right? I never saw him in any of those Sixers games, of which, I've seen a lot because the Celtics have played them a ton over, Ben Simmons' career, and they're on national TV a good amount. I have never seen him, take command of a huddle or yell or be demonstrative on the court. So I haven't even seen a willingness or a desire to be the man, let alone talking about, the skill set. So it seems a little disingenuous to me that that's what his, real request is. But if you look at the teams in the league right now where, okay, like you said, Sap, all things being equal, what teams would be the best fit for Ben Simmons? I do believe the Celtics fit his skill set really well. And I think the Warriors, we've talked about, fit his skill set really well. He needs to be surrounded by primary scorers who could take the scoring load off of him and guys he can distribute to. Right. I think that's the methodology with Ben Simmons, in that the Sixers, I really don't think it was that bad of a fit, Sap. I know you said that at the top of the podcast too. And it didn't work there. It's hard to blame Joel Embiid for that. I think, the blame lies more on, you can blame Doc Rivers, sure, Brett Brown, who was the coach before Doc Rivers, sure, but a lot of that blame lies on Ben Simmons, and he seems either unwilling or unable to take any responsibility for that.
Yeah, I mean, that should be a good pair, right? When you have a 6'10" point guard who has extremely high-end athletic ability, is a brilliant passer, great defender, accomplished rebounder, can score inside. He can do that. He's not going to exactly kill you from the perimeter. And then you've got a center like Joel Embiid who can score at all 3 levels. I mean, Embiid can actually shoot 3-pointers. He's got a great mid-range game. He's phenomenal in the low post. He may be the toughest matchup in the league. I mean, I know Durant to me is still the best offensive player in the league without question. But I mean, good luck trying to stop Joel Embiid when he's healthy and engaged, which oftentimes he is. So yeah, that you would think could work. The problem is that I think that Simmons needs kind of like an open lane to get to the basket, because he drives to the basket at a very high level. And if Embiid's in the way, that becomes a problem. But there's ways to get around that. They don't have to be on the court together all of the time. And Embiid's good enough from the mid-range and even beyond the arc that, that should work. It didn't. Although I will go back and say that it kind of did. They had the best record in the East for a reason. Those two guys are really good, but it just blew up in the postseason. There was a lot of pressure, and they didn't accomplish what they were supposed to. And the blame went right to Ben Simmons, deservedly so. Although Joel Embiid in the fourth quarter of the last couple of games in that series was not good. And we know Doc Rivers has done this on 7 occasions where he's lost a series after having either a 3-1 or a 3-2 lead. So that at some point falls on the coach.
Yeah, certainly. But, I think it's one thing to say, okay, he had kind of crappy fourth quarters versus Ben Simmons, who had a crappy series. I think a lot more blame lies on Ben Simmons. But then, so Sap, if you look at the league now and all the potential landing spots for Ben Simmons, if it didn't end up working in Philadelphia to, the point where they were in the final round or winning a championship, why do we think it will work better somewhere else where he has maybe lesser talent? Is there any reason to believe that?
Because there's always a general manager and a coach who think that they can get him fixed, right? I mean, and get him in the right situation that he'll flourish. Look at Denver, right? We've talked about potentially a swap of Michael Porter Jr. for Ben Simmons. Probably not going to happen now because Porter just signed a max contract, right? 5 years, $207 million. That would be an interesting trade because we've talked about Michael Porter Jr. At times looks like Jason Tatum on the court, right? Like at times he looks to be every bit as good as Jason Tatum. And then other games you'll watch, it's like, where is Michael Porter Jr.? He's very up and down, but his ceiling is Jason Tatum, 6'10" guy who can score from all different parts of the court. So that, could be a potential move. I mean, the contracts would line up. Both young guys, a new change of scenery for both. But yeah, I mean, someone's going to think that they can fix Ben Simmons because the talent's there. There'll be a coach who thinks he can get inside his head to motivate him and playing with the right people. Now, Golden State makes a lot of sense because you got Steph Curry and you've got Klay Thompson and you got Steve Kerr. I think that group could probably get the most out of Ben Simmons. Now, the owner of the Golden State Warriors comes out last week, Joe Lacob, and says, well, we really, couldn't have both him and Draymond Green on the court together because they're too similar in players, and the owner shouldn't be talking like that. First of all, it feels a little like tampering, and second of all,
he got fined for tampering.
Sure, yeah, and he should.
He did.
So, and I also think that could work though, because you got Steph and Klay Thompson, who are the two best shooters that have ever played together. I mean, we all agree Steph's the greatest shooter the sport's ever seen, and Klay's a top 5 shooter. So they're gonna open up a lot for Simmons, and they've opened up a lot for Draymond Green. Also, again, I have to stress on people, there's 48 minutes in a game. They don't have to play all 48 minutes together. You could play each player 34 minutes, maybe have them on the court together, 12 minutes, have them on the court separately for 20 odd minutes so that you're not, having the same two types of players on the court for the entire game. That's
how you build
your rotation. Creative, right? You build your rotation. Exactly. I mean, that's, people will say, well, how's Russell Westbrook and Rajon Rondo going to, work out together? Well, maybe you play Westbrook 30 minutes one night and Rondo 18, and then you give another guy a night off. I don't know what you do. You figure it out. There's plenty of minutes available in a game. It's not the All-Star game when you get 12 All-Stars you got to figure out the minutes for. So I think it could work in Golden State. Now you'd have a really elite defensive team with Draymond Green, Ben Simmons. We know Klay, although we have to see him after 2 years of fighting injuries, has always been an elite defender. So that to me would be a good spot for him because there's good culture there, right? With Steph and Klay and Steve Kerr. And look, Draymond Green and Ben Simmons on the same team together would be fascinating to watch because in terms of personalities, can you find two totally different guys? I mean, Ben Simmons is like this uber talented 6'10" guy who can do everything, but looks like he doesn't give a crap about anything. And Draymond's an overachiever, right? 6'6", but he's one of the great defenders we've seen over the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah,
and
first overall pick versus a second round pick. I mean,
right. And Draymond's a guy who's not afraid to be opinionated. Like I know in 5, 6, 7 years, Draymond's going to be on TV, right? We know that.
Yeah.
Like he's probably going to be on TNT as another guy with Shaq and Charles, or if one of those guys retires, he's the guy. Ben Simmons, again, I don't know what he sounds like. So that would be the oddest pairing ever, but maybe Draymond gets something out of Ben Simmons.
Well, Sap, take his requested trade at face value that he wants to be the guy, the primary guy on a team. What's the ceiling for a team that has Ben Simmons as their best player?
I don't think it's very high because he doesn't score. Like, I mean, now, how do you want to define best player? Have we ever looked at a player and said, this guy's the best player in the league because he's an elite defender and a great passer? No. The greatest players of the last 40, 50 years all could score. The only guy that was in the discussion and actually held that title for a while, 3, 4, 5 years, was Magic Johnson. But let's not forget, when Magic had the title as the best player in basketball, he was scoring 22, 23 points per game, right? It wasn't like he was afraid of the free throw line. He was an 85% free throw shooter. So Magic's best skill was passing. His second best skill was scoring because he wasn't an elite defender. He was a really good rebounder, but he could score. Whether it be Bird or Michael Jordan or LeBron or Kobe or whoever you want to put out there, these guys could all score. It's a scoring league. The last time the best player in the sport was not a scorer, you probably have to go back to Bill Russell. And let's not ever put Ben Simmons in the same sentence with Bill Russell, right? Because that's blasphemy. So you get my point that to be the best player in the league or to be the alpha on a team, you tend to have to be a scorer. Right. I mean, as great as Draymond Green is, no one in their right mind thinks he's ever been the best player in Golden State. For the most part, he's been the third or fourth best player behind Steph, Clay, and obviously when Durant was there. Yeah. So Simmons seems to be like an elite role player who thinks he's the best player. So that's a tough thing to try to have all happen at the same time.
So, amongst these three guys that you talked about in your poll question, Simmons, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Bradley Beal, I think, it's established enough to this point in their respective careers that they cannot be the best player or the alpha on a championship team. We're not talking about, a Kevin Durant or a LeBron James here. A few players are. They're certainly all all-star caliber players, and they certainly could improve a team they go to should it be the right fit. But all of them do come with question marks. They're not immediate. You acquire them in your championship contender guys necessarily. So if I'm the Celtics, again, I think you have to look into all those things you said, Sap, in terms of, okay, is there a potential conflict of interest with Tatum and Beal being too cliquey? Is Towns the right necessary fit here because he hasn't won a lot in Minnesota? Can Ben Simmons get his head screwed on straight, and would he even be willing to accept being the third sort of banana here? So all these guys, while really intriguing trade candidates, do come with questions because of in the case of Simmons, in the case of Beal and Towns, they have not won jack squat, and in the case of Ben Simmons, he just doesn't seem to care very much about basketball, and no one seems to really know what he wants. So I do think it's interesting that all of those guys, they are in the positions where they are, that we're talking about, very talented guys on the trading block for a reason, which is different sometimes than a lot of the guys who want out. Like James Harden, say what you want about him, I don't think there was any real concerns from the Nets when they were acquiring James Harden about how that was going to, ultimately work. Because he's had a relationship with Durant and Kyrie Irving, and he was available for the most part and performed very well. So I think it's interesting to see where these guys land. Again, I think Towns almost wins by default in this question for the Celtics.
Yeah, and he may stay there because now they have new ownership. And maybe write off his disappointing last year, and I will because of COVID. And I'm not one to use that excuse, but the man had COVID. He lost his mom and grandmother to COVID and 7 other family members. That is an incredible impact on a human being. So let's give Karl-Anthony Towns a lot of slack on that. He's one athlete that I will say, yeah, COVID had a massive effect on him, not just personally, but throughout his entire life. Let me throw one other team out there because they have just a slew of draft picks, right? Oklahoma City, they have 17 first-round picks over the next 7 years. Can they put together a bunch of draft picks, maybe Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, send that to Philadelphia for Ben Simmons? Ben Simmons at that point is the guy, clearly the best player on that team. He goes to a market which is really player-friendly. Like, they love their stars in Oklahoma City. They loved Durant. They loved Westbrook. They even loved Chris Paul for the 1 year he was there. Why not look into that? And he goes there and, puts up big numbers, becomes a Hall of Fame player, and no one even realizes he's there because they don't win anything because I don't know how hungry the guy is to win. And Philadelphia gets a nice player in Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and draft picks. That's just another – you could probably come up with some sort of deal for most teams in the NBA because the great thing about the NBA is these things are all possible.
Yeah, honestly, Sap, I don't think that they would trade Shea Gilgeous-Alexander for Simmons right now, and I don't think that for the Thunder, they certainly wouldn't give him up and picks because then, what are you pairing him with,
Right.
Simmons? So, eventually they want to win. They do seem like they're ways away from it right now, but I don't think they're going to give up a lot of draft capital plus a player. They might give up one or the other
Right.
to Philadelphia. But yeah, it's again, we've talked about this as a tricky spot for Philadelphia because they desperately want to win right now and they have the mechanism to do it in one of the best players in the league in Joel Embiid. So they don't want to do a rebuild and they are trying not to take 50 cents on the dollar, but ultimately what they're going to get is very likely 25 cents on the dollar for Ben Simmons. It's an interesting standoff now, Sap, because he's legitimately saying he's not going to show up and just won't play in the season. I would like to see Philadelphia call his bluff. That's a lot of money to flush down the toilet. And I know he has a lot of money already, but it's still, we're talking about, $30 million by sitting out a year and
If
not
not
gaining
more,
a year
right.
towards free agency, if not
Yeah.
more. It does seem like I cannot envision a real scenario where a player is willing to just throw that money out. And if he is, then I really would also question how much he wants to play basketball too.
Or how bright he is, right? Because,
Right.
at some point the money's there. And we're going to find this out with Kyrie because I calculated today if Kyrie doesn't get vaccinated, he's going to miss 44 games this year, 41 at home, 2 at the Knicks and 1 at Golden State. 44 games missed would come to about $20 million. And it's been issued by the NBA that if you miss games because you're not vaccinated in New York or San Francisco, you don't get paid. So that's $20 million. That's $20 million that Kyrie's writing off, right? So that's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. I'll throw another team out there because I just love throwing these ideas out there, and maybe it's like batting practice for you. You just swat them away. But we talked about Ben Simmons to Portland for Damian Lillard, but how about going to Portland for CJ McCollum and other things? Because McCollum is an accomplished player, better suited to be your third best player than your second best player, but at least it's something for Philadelphia. And then you please Damian Lillard, at least I think you please him by going out and getting an upgrade in Ben Simmons. And we know, again, with the caveat being Ben Simmons could retire in a year because he doesn't like basketball, whereas CJ McCollum, we know, is invested. He's the president of the Players Association, all of that. That's another option, I would think.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable option for both teams. I think you could look at it from Portland as an upgrade in talent. And for Philadelphia as getting something of value, a borderline all-star player who at least, can shoot the ball. But if Ben Simmons went to Portland and Lillard's still there, Sap, who is the primary ball handler?
Well, I think Simmons could be because I think Dame can play off the ball. Don't you think? I mean, he's obviously by definition a point guard. He's 6'1" or 6'2", but I think that they could almost share that. I mean, that's probably an easy way of getting out of this question, but they could share it because Simmons can also be effective in the low post, which I don't think the 76ers did enough of. He is within 6 feet ambidextrous. Outside of 6 feet, he can't shoot, but inside of 6 feet, he could shoot with either hand, and he's such a great passer out of the low post that I think you take advantage of that more with him going to another team without Ben Simmons, without Joel Embiid being down there. So I think they could share the responsibility. And again, if they both play 36 minutes, you have them off the court separately at times so that you have one of them out there as the primary ball handler, and then obviously to start and end games they're out there and they can kind of share that responsibility. I think it would be a pretty interesting duo because I think Dame Lillard's pretty easy to play with. I don't know if Ben Simmons is easy to play with. You would think because he has that type of game where he doesn't have to score that he's easy to play with, but also it's difficult to have a guy on the court who can't shoot. That really limits you offensively.
Yeah, I mean, especially at the end of games, it's a killer. A lot of times he can't be on the court, and it's not just because of his lack of shooting or lack of willingness to shoot. It's because he's piss poor at the free throw line too. So teams will just hack him, if he gets the ball. We've seen it. We saw it with Shaquille O'Neal 20 years ago. We're seeing it with Ben Simmons now. I mean, he can't. Basically, he's forced his own team's hand to take him off the court at the end of the game. And if you're paying a guy like he's the top player on your team and he can't play at the most important part of the game, then, what is he worth? So yeah, it's tricky. Wherever he goes, Sap, there needs to be a sincere rebuild of his confidence and his value and what he can do. Now, I've said this for a long time, and I say it with players who struggle at the free throw line all the time. Shoot it underhanded. For the love of God, just shoot the free throws underhanded. It's much easier. If you're a crap free throw shooter, you can pick up your free throw percentage by 20, 30%. No
you sound like Rick. You sound like Rick Barry.
He's right.
One of the all-time great free throw shooters. The problem is, it's against the brand that these players have established. It's not macho, right?
No, it's not. But you know what's better for your brand? Not
hitting 70% rather than 40%. Right. Yeah, I mean, look, LeBron's not a great free throw shooter, and neither is Russell Westbrook. I kind of cringe what could happen at the end of games for the Lakers. And Anthony Davis is a good free throw shooter. He wasn't last year. He just wasn't the normal Anthony Davis last year. Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is to hit these free throws. And look, Wilt Chamberlain tried that for some point. I mean, could you picture Wilt Chamberlain shooting free throws underhanded? The most physically imposing player in the history of the league. Like, that's not even a question. We could talk about who the greatest player is. By far, the most physically imposing player in the history of the league was Wilt Chamberlain. You'd probably say Shaq was number 2. But it's because when Wilt was doing it, he was noticeably bigger than everybody. Shaq was bigger than everybody, but also Wilt was a better athlete than Shaq and was always in supreme shape. When he was busy, with his 20,000 women, he was also, a beach volleyball star. I mean, the guy was like a freakish athlete. Obviously, Shaq's a freakish athlete, but Wilt Chamberlain was a freakish athlete among freakish athletes. So he was the most physically imposing player in the league, and he even, embraced shooting free throws underhanded. Although, who's going to make fun of Wilt Chamberlain? Do whatever you can to get that rectified. It seems easy, right? Because these are the best players in the world. Like, would you expect Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers to miss a 8-yard pass with a guy wide open? No. I mean, they're gonna connect on that in their sleep. Now, Tim Tebow, maybe he would hit someone in their feet, or Saylor or Cam Newton or whatever. But the great quarterbacks you would expect, 8-10 yards out, guys wide open, they're not going to miss that throw. Same thing here with free throw shooting. And it's something that teams should work on. But again, the players, their egos are so big that, all of a sudden you're going to fix whatever was broken. No, they just continue to do what they have done their entire life. And that mindset does make them who they are. But at some point you have to look in the mirror and say, well, I've got to be better at this.
Right. So I think the last point I want to make about these three guys, Sap, Simmons, Towns, and who's the third? Bradley Beal. I do think that Ben Simmons has the most room for growth in his game.
Sure.
That Towns and Beal, they sort of are what they are. I do think in better situations, they could, win more. Certainly Towns, I think fits that bill because he's had literally nothing for, except for the 1 year where he had Jimmy Butler. Throughout his career, he's had very little to play with. Bradley Beal, did have John Wall in his prime a little bit. And last year it was Russell Westbrook. I'm not saying anything great, but better than what Towns has had. I do think Towns, by taking a step back, can actually improve. But Ben Simmons clearly has his ceiling still remains insanely high, but the questions are, abundant about whether he's willing to do that or able to even do that, because it's a mental thing. And I think you've said this before, Sap, teams can look at the medicals and guys and saying, okay, that's a knee. We can live with that. We can fix that. But with the mental stuff, really, you throw up your hands and kind of hope at that point.
Yeah, we generally don't question whether a guy likes to play the sport that he's paid handsomely for. Like, the last pro athlete I thought that way about was Jay Cutler. Marvelously talented quarterback, but there were times when he was on the field, it was like, does this guy really even like doing this? Like, he's really good at it, but it doesn't look like it consumes him. And I know earlier in the NFL season, we talked about, was Aaron Rodgers invested? Well, if you've seen the last 2 games, he's certainly invested. You saw what he did in the Sunday night victory over San Francisco, his reaction on the sideline, his reaction spiking the ball, leading to the game-winning field goal where he pumped his fist and knew that Mason Crosby was going to hit the 51-yard field goal.
He does hate the 49ers. So,
he hates the 49ers. I think he hates the Packers. He hates everybody. But I think once he's on the field, he's extremely competitive. I think he has such a massive ego that he's not going to do anything but his best. I mean, the first week, be damned. I think he was just maybe in a different state than the state of Florida, and he never plays well in Florida. That's the truth. So, but yeah, we don't question how great that guy wants to be. With Ben Simmons, kind of like Jay Cutler, I'm like, does this really motivate him to the point where he, like Tom Brady, you could see at the end of the loss to the Rams, looked like he just lost the final game of his career. Like someone stole his dog, someone kidnapped his kids. Like he looked distraught. And it was week 3 of his 22nd season. With Ben Simmons, it's like, yeah, we lost game 7 and I just, whatever. I'll see you tomorrow.
And then he went missing for the rest of the
And then he went missing. Yeah. I mean, again, comparing anybody to Tom Brady is probably not fair. And certainly not Ben Simmons, but that is a question mark. Like, okay, you're going to go commit 4 years, $147 million. You're going to give up 3 first-round picks, 2 current players to bring in Ben Simmons, and he doesn't give a fuck. That's not the situation you want to be in. I mean, but again, this is a league that executives take big swings because that's what you have to do. You have to take big swings. You can't just kind of build slowly. This isn't like the NFL where you build, and maybe you get your quarterback and now you're ready to contend. In this league, you got to go get studs. And Ben Simmons at his best is a stud.
So Sap, then let's end the show on predictions for these 3 guys let's give it 2 years. Where is each player?
Boy, that's a good one.
Or any of them really where they currently are?
Well, someone's going to be in LA, right? I mean, can't you just see that the Lakers are going to somehow figure out a way to get one of these guys?
No.
I know the salaries, with their salary cap restrictions and all that. And I got to think someone or someone's going to be playing for the Clippers because Ballmer has so much money and has to contend because he's got that new arena opening up in 2.5 years. So I got to figure one of these guys goes to LA, and I would think most likely Ben Simmons, right? Because he's got a home there and he kind of,
I don't know how though.
I know. It's like,
yes, we know he wants to be there. He clearly wants to be there.
He said California.
Obvious.
So that would make the most sense. I think he's in LA somewhere, whether it's with the Clippers or the Lakers, or I don't know, maybe the Rams sign him as a tight end or whatever. But I got to think that he's playing in LA. Karl Anthony Towns, I kind of get the feeling that they're going to appease him and he stays in Minnesota and they try to build around him. Bradley Beal, where does Bradley Beal go? Again, a contending team's going to want him. Who's a team that needs a perimeter shooter that needs that type of game? Maybe he ends up in Philadelphia, because that would be an interesting mix with Joel Embiid. But again, generally you don't see these trades within the conference other than when Anthony Davis forced his way to LA. So, that's a great question. That's a really good question.
Thank you.
That's a great question that you stumped me on. I'm trying to think on the fly here, which can sometimes be dangerous.
Do you want to do a column about it, Sap? Predicting where these guys
I'm in a writing slump again.
Okay.
Once I get my second cataract out and I get the reading glasses because my eyes are all screwed up right now in a good way. Because the right eye has the new lens, but I can't see up close, and it's kind of awkward.
I'll help you out then.
Yes, you write the column. How about you write it?
Well, no, I'm not writing the column, but I'm going to tell you where each of those guys is going to end up. I told you
you're the idea man. I get.
Yeah, I told you a couple of weeks ago. I think Ben Simmons is going to end up in San Antonio. I don't know exactly what the package will be. I don't think it will be very attractive for Philadelphia, but at this point, I don't think any package is going to be very attractive for them. So I see Ben Simmons in San Antonio. Okay. I think he could flourish there, depending on how long Greg Popovich decides to stick around and coach. But I think that's the right type of coach for him. So I'll say Simmons in San Antonio. Bradley Beal, I think, is going to end up with the Knicks, either via trade, because the Knicks have some interesting young players. They could trade to the Wizards, or they'll have money in free agency to offer him if he reaches free agency. So I'll say he goes to the Knicks. And Karl Anthony Towns, I do think he'll stick around for a little bit. I think he'll at least give the new ownership group a chance to see how it works. Now, I don't think that the team would be opposed to trading him should they get a really good offer for him. And if they struggle, especially this year, I could see them moving him. I do think Boston is a legitimate possibility for him should he become available. But as of right now, I'll stay in 2 years' time. He'll still be in Minnesota, but Beal on the Knicks and Simmons in San Antonio. Those are my predictions. We can revisit the tape later when I'm proven correct or probably
yes, and I'll be seeing better with my new eyes. But the thing about Karl Anthony Towns, would Minnesota be so forgetful? I mean, it's new ownership. I get it, but are you going to send a star player to Boston to win another championship? Like, I
I
don't know if they've ever lived down sending Kevin Garnett to the Celtics to win a championship. Like, they were going to win one in Minnesota with Garnett. I get that. Garnett going from Minnesota to Boston kind of feels a little bit like Matt Stafford going from the Lions to the Rams. Like,
yeah.
you leave a suck organization for a good one and you win. So I don't know. Would
Well,
Minnesota?
Minnesota had a history of loaning athletes to Boston and then becoming, even more successful. Randy Moss, set the touchdown record. David Ortiz
Yeah,
started his career on the Twins. So
yeah,
yeah,
but
I think
Moss went to the Raiders first,
he
and
did. That's
he
true.
kind of quit on the Raiders too. So they got
Oh,
him here
he
for a few years.
100% quit on them.
Oh man, and he probably would tell you that. I mean, the most gifted receiver ever, but not the best receiver ever. It's a different argument. But yeah, Minnesota's sent some people here, and they've done quite well, but none more than Garnett and David Ortiz for sure. Who, when he was with
Yeah.
Minnesota, had a different name, didn't he? Like Arias was his last name.
Who knows? These
David
guys,
Arias. Well, don't
yeah.
forget he was originally a Seattle Mariner. How's that?
Wow.
So two teams passed on David Ortiz. He came here, and the rest is history.
I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, the story that the Yankees also passed on him. He wasn't on the Yankees, but they had a chance to acquire him, and they said, no, thank you.
Yeah, no, he wasn't a real hot commodity. But Pedro Martinez had a friendship with him, made a call to Theo Epstein and said, why don't you bring him in? They brought him in. It wasn't a big contract. And, right away, he wasn't even playing all the time. He was kind of platooning with Jeremy Giambi. It took like 2 months before he became a regular in the lineup. Then he hit 30-plus home runs in 03, and then, we know what happened after that. He became legendary. So, yeah, that can happen. So, but I wonder if this ownership would say, you know what, let's send another star player to Boston to win a championship.
I know that it might be a tough pill to swallow.
But, I mean, maybe we're giving A-Rod and that group too much credit. Like, although A-Rod seems to have a sense of history. He does. I mean, you could see on the games on Sunday Night Baseball, although at times he can be irritating, but he does have a
history.
It does on baseball history, but I think he's also a sports guy. He really is. I mean, his idol growing up was Dan Marino because he played quarterback in high school. He loved Dan Marino. That was his guy. So I think he has a sense of sports history, and
maybe he's got a grudge against Boston now because
that's what I'm saying.
Jennifer Lopez is back with Ben Affleck, and so maybe he's got a vendetta against that too. So.
Exactly. I'm not trading our best player to Boston. Be damned, because I don't want to see them win another championship, and Ben Affleck will be happy with J-Lo. There you go. I like that. That's good conspiracy theory. Perfect. Awesome. Perfect. That's awesome.
All right, Sap. Well, that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are presented, as we always are, by Full Press Coverage. Check out their website for lots of great podcasts and articles. And you can see all the latest on social media for the show and our opinions and polls at JohnSap25 on Twitter, at Jet Stryer. You can find the podcast wherever podcasts are found. Just type in the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. And you can find us on YouTube if you're not watching there already, youtube.com/Jet Stryer. We will talk to you later, everybody. See ya.